Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar hosted by the Socioeconomic Rights Project of the Dula Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape. The webinar today focuses on special needs housing policy, progress and status. In terms of the participants, we are hoping that there's a combination of academics, community-based organization, representatives from non-governmental organizations, policymakers, as well as stakeholders in the field. My name is Gladys. I'll be your host today. Briefly, special needs housing, for purposes of this discussion today, special needs housing refers to housing opportunities for persons who, for a variety of reasons, are unable to live independently in normal housing or require assistance in terms of a safe, supportive, protective living environment, and who typically need some level of care or protection. So it's housing for vulnerable persons who are unable to secure adequate housing without special assistance. This category of people is wide and may range from households, families, single persons, the elderly, victims of domestic violence, military veterans, persons living with HIV and AIDS, persons with disabilities, child-held households. As such, special needs housing caters for two broad categories of individuals, namely those who require group housing and those who require individual housing. And to start off our discussion today, we have invited a panel. It is made up of a representative from the Department of Human Settlement, as well as two representative stakeholders. I'll introduce the speakers today briefly, and then we'll give them an opportunity to take us through the discussion. After the discussion, we'll have a session, an opportunity for question and answer session. I encourage all participants to kindly post their questions on the chat box. And also to remind everyone that as part of housekeeping, to kindly put off their mic and allow the presenters to speak, and then we'll have an opportunity at the question and answer session to either speak or read through the questions that we posted on the chat box. So to start us off with the discussion, I'll invite Mr. Nonswabi Nonkla, Director, Sector Policy Program Development under the Chief Directorate at the Human Settlement Policy Development Program, National Department of Human Settlement. He will speak to us from a perspective of the Human Settlements, Department of Human Settlements. That will then be followed by a presentation by Lizelle Duplessis, a senior manager at the Project Preparation Trust. She's been involved as a stakeholder in the engagement between civil society and Department of Human Settlements in drafting the special needs housing policy. We will then hear from Margaret Grobler, National Coalition of Social Services. She'll give us a perspective from a CSO perspective and will reflect on the gaps and challenges that the sector currently faces by operating where there's a vacuum in the policy. And those few words, I'd like to welcome the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, please go ahead.
Let me see if I can upload the presentation for this. Is it visible on the side, colleagues?
Yes, it's visible. You could click on the slideshow. Okay, please help us out. Just start so long. I'll help you.
Okay, thank you very much. We must express our appreciation for the invite and hope that we'll be able to meet the expectations of the webinar. To start off, we take the purpose as it was stated on the invite, that the purpose of the presentation will be to provide a status quo update, which is progress and status on the special housing needs policy and implementation guidelines, insights and highlights from the department's perspective. To begin with, the special housing needs policy and implementation guidelines, as explained earlier in the introduction, emanates out of a desire to respond to, among others, high levels of vulnerability, spatial dislocation, employment migration, weakened family structures, substance abuse, and gender-based violence, etc. In seeking to respond to these socioeconomic conditions, the policy recognizes the role of the Npos in the provision of accommodation and special care services to persons with special housing needs. The special housing needs are defined in the policy as housing opportunities for persons who, for a variety of reasons, are unable to live independently in normal housing, or who require assistance in terms of a safe, supportive, and protected living environment, and who need some level of protection, be it on a permanent or temporary basis. The persons that are sought to be protected by the policy include, among others, orphans and vulnerable children, older persons, other vulnerable people such as victims of serious crime and human trafficking, persons with physical disabilities, victims of domestic abuse and similar crimes, gender-based violence, as an example, those receiving substance abuse rehabilitation services, the terminally ill and frail persons, including those affected by HIV and AIDS, and lastly, the homeless, destitute, or those living on the streets. The process towards the formulation of the policy has been protracted and it has a long history, but would like to update on what has been happening in the recent past. We start off by saying that during the policy debate on 433, excuse me, in the human settlements, in the NSOP that took place on the 31st of May 2022, our minister highlighted the policy priorities that the department will be focusing on. Amongst others, she stated that in order to address the current rental issues, the department will be consolidating all rental interventions and craft a comprehensive rental policy. She noted that currently there is fragmentation in terms of the existing rental programs. She continued to indicate that this has been evidenced by the varying norms and standards for community residential units, social housing, and other forms of rentals, which include backyard, local government, as well as institutional rental. Specifically for this purpose, the minister indicated that the department has been at pains in responding to issues that are raised by Chapter 9 institutions, specifically the South African Human Rights Commission and the Commission for Gender Equality regarding the issue of special housing needs. She then went further to indicate, and gender-based violence. She went further to indicate women have been affected by this scourge without a solution. She made an undertaking that will focus our policies to ensure that there is provision for the vulnerable groups of the society and some form of special need and or second level housing. What preceded the debate were some of the activities that took place. We say that it is well known that the policy and implementation guidelines were developed collaboratively with the Department of Social Development. And in the previous development of the policy, the Department of Health participated fully in the formulation of the policy, except in the formulation of the implementation guidelines. It follows, therefore, that the policy formulation and approval processes will include both the DHS and DSD. The steps that we've taken thus far include a meeting that took place between our DG's department as well as the Department of Social Development, in which some critical resolutions and timelines were agreed upon between the DG, Mr. Changana, and the DG for DSD, Mr. Mpunu, with regards to the special housing needs policy and implementation guidelines. Amongst those resolutions were that there is a need for the policy to be approved and implementation guidelines. Indicated that the focus should be on the approval of the policy and program, which will have to find expression in the business plans and or amendment thereof, business plans that are submitted by provinces and municipalities. He further agreed that the policy needs to be presented to the joint technical MINMEC for approval by the two ministers and maybe not to cabinet. What we refer to as technical MINMEC, it means is the HODs, is the DG and the HODs of all provinces, as well as the heads of human settlements departments in municipalities. The MINMEC is constituted by the minister as well as the members of executive councils of all these provinces. Programs and projects, it was also agreed that if there are projects that are good to go, which means that are ready to be launched, these could be taken through the MTech processes as well as and assessment of what the financial implications will be. It was agreed that the ST should submit applications to DHS for programs that need to be packaged with provinces for the current financial year. It was also agreed that with minor adjustments to get the programs also approved and discussed with National Treasury. Some of the projects that were then identified included the Vulindlela project in KZN, as well as the projects that involved GBV, the Kululeka centers, of which then it was noted there were 3 in each province. There were 3 provinces that had these centers and that these needed to be extended to other provinces. That shelters could also be used for 1 or 2 purposes, including extended it to encompass military veterans and vulnerable groups. Further on resolutions, it was also resolved that the policy and implementation guidelines should be amended, particularly the section that deals with Npos as initiators, to also include the Department of Social Development as an initiator. Most importantly, it was agreed that the DHS would carry the capital part of the project with regards to special housing needs, and the operational costs will be funded by the DSD, a point of which was emphasized that the matter had already by then escalated to the Minister of DSD, and that this will need to be reinforced in the memorandum of agreement that will be signed between the 2 departments. The way forward that was agreed was that there needs to be a briefing to both ministers, that both legal services of these departments would have to finalize the issue of an MOA, request both ministers to approve the policy and guidelines, and also acknowledge that there are private sector companies that have already offered to fund some of the operational costs in partnership with DSD. That the item would further serve at a jointly held technical MINMEC as well as before the 2 ministers for approval. Then would be followed by the signing of the of the MOA. Where are we now? The policy and implementation guidelines have been approved by our minister, but it's also subject to approval by the Minister of Social Development, pending the resolution of two issues. One issue relates to the provisions of the Housing Act. In particular, it relates to how a policy or program is approved by the department, which means that it must be approved in consultation with all the members of the executive councils, including members of the South African Local Government Association. The second part is the one that will then be reserved for the two ministers to decide on. Before I leave the slide, I must also indicate that steps have already been taken to consultation with regard to the Department of Social Development to bring these matters to their attention, so that the policy is approved and is rolled out once it has been approved by the other ministers and concurrence has been obtained. Colleagues, this is what I wish to share with you. I did not go into details with the policy. I think most will be familiar with the policy. The implementation guidelines provide the mechanism to implement policy on special housing needs. They are intended to ensure that there is a process for approval of funding and applications by the relevant members of executive councils, which means MECs in the provinces. There are mechanisms that have been laid out. There are also technical guidelines on typologies, housing typologies that have been agreed upon in the guidelines to be either constructed, or if an existing structure has been obtained, how it will be refurbished to meet the requisite requirements in the implementation guidelines. Chair, that will be my contribution. I thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the perspective from the Department of Human Settlement. I'd like to encourage the participants to please post their questions on the chat box, and we will get that to the question and answer part as soon as all the presenters complete their presentation. And now I'd like to invite Lizelle du Plessis. Lizelle, over to you.
Can you see the document?
You're sharing. Okay, there we go. You can expand
it. And I can't quite get on here to just start the slideshow. Do you see which, I've got two screens. Which screen are you seeing? Do you?
The big one.
The big one.
We see both of them, but we see the big one. Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay then. It's a privilege for me to share with you a little bit of the road that we have been walking, both with government and with civil society over the past more than 20 years. We're going for 30 years. And so in the quest really of civil society and NPOs looking for grant funding provided by the department for group housing and accommodation, for supported or assisted living, for sorry, I see I forgot to do this. to be provided by registered NPOs for low-income persons who are dependent on specialized care, facilities and equipment, or who are required who require affordable housing within a secured area. So the whole idea was that such a program would be inclusive and that wouldn't be a lesser housing program or something which is granted by special concession. So the whole idea was that the program should enjoy the same status as human settlements programs and that it should be included in the housing code so that it can be interpreted the same in all the provinces and then it can be funded on the same basis as all other housing programs. So yeah, we call it a struggle because it's really been a very long time. It's probably, I don't know, maybe the longest time ever that it took people to get to the development of a policy. But since the launching of the housing subsidy or the housing subsidies or the housing programs of government, that was in 1995 already, civil society engaged with government, whether on national level or on provincial level over the years to assist in this matter. And there were some pilot projects as early as 1997. There was KZN started their transitional housing policy or compiled that in 1998 already, and they are still assisting special needs or in the provision of special needs housing. The first special needs housing forum was formed, and many of the people that I see here have been on that forum. They have been working under the auspices of the Social Housing Foundation, and they did submissions to the minister. And so through the years, there has been many developments that gave the NPOs hope that something will come up, will be developed, that will eventually assist them in their quest for assistance. So in 2012, I see Helene is also in the audience. So they assisted by doing a presentation to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and that resulted in that resolution that the department should investigate and draft a policy for people with special needs. And at the same time, there was also a feeling that the special needs housing task team should be established. And so that task team met on a regular basis over the years, and the submission was made to the ministers of human settlements, social development and health. That was signed by 42 NPOs, and they also supported the advocacy process in the Western Cape. And from that advocacy process, which was eventually escalated to the Premier, it was the Department of Human Settlements decided to formally request the department whether they can use the variation of that institutional subsidy, as was used by that time already for more than a decade in a place like the KZN. And at that MINLEG meeting then, it was decided that they should investigate the development of such a policy. So, and at the same time, really, the Department of Social Development identified the issue of special needs housing and as a gap in the sector. and they developed an infrastructure policy that was approved by their MINMEC. And eventually the two departments came together on this issue of the policy and to address the issue of special needs housing. And so that was quite an exciting time, because this was now the first time that both the departments came together, and also they found funders to assist with the supporting the policy development. And it seems like everything would have been on its way now. So there was a terms of reference that was developed and for this research and policy development program. And it was done in consultation with some of the national nonprofit organizations and civil society organizations. And the first stakeholder meeting then took place in June 2014, and all the representatives were required to be officially appointed. We had 22 state reps and 15 civil society reps, and that first meeting took place then of the project steering committee took place in October 2014. And the whole idea was that, was that all the NGOs would consult their constituencies on all the matters, that we that have been raised at these meetings. Let me just find a way here. Okay, so the policy formulation really looked at the definition and the demands, the legal opinion, in very important, the typologies and the norms and standards. The norms and standards were very important, and I think that is where the biggest bridges were built, and where people came to a better understanding of where they are and what the expectations are. And so, you know, if you look at government's norms and standards for some of the special needs facilities, we must say it's hospital standards. It's very big, and it is to such an extent that it wasn't really possible for non-profit organizations to meet those norms and standards, and also not in terms of operationalizing these very high norm standard facilities. We also looked at precedent studies and cost norming. Drafting of that policy took place step by step, and everybody was consulted and everybody worked together, and it was really taking place in such good spirit, and it was very well received, both by the two departments and the civil society. So there was stakeholder engagement, plenty thereof, but also national workshops with older people and the persons with disability. And eventually we had that national workshop in 2015, and people were still given time to provide comments, which were incorporated and recirculated, and government then went on with their social economic impact assessment system, which has also been reviewed since. So then, so over the past 7 years, the two departments tried to set up meetings with their DGs and their ministers, as been reported now by Mr. Pochla, and various briefing documents were prepared, and inquiries were eventually raised via political parties in parliament. Letters and emails were sent. I think that civil society has tried everything they could. I think the only thing that they didn't do was taking to the streets. But yeah, so eventually, then also the South African Human Resource Council joined in with their own investigation. The state lawyers were consulted, and a legal opinion on special needs was obtained. That was requested by the Department of Social Development, and so you'll see quite a lot of other interactions took place with the South African Human Resource Council, with a seminar, with a letter to Minister Sisulu, with a portfolio presentations later that year, and we were also informed that the department got some inquiries from the Public Protector and the UN in some international meetings. And so then in 2018, the department advertised that tender to compile implementation guidelines. So up to now, there was quite a lot of, so with the policy formulation, there was quite a lot of consultation with the NGOs, but with the drafting of the implementation guidelines, a tender was put out to look at various procedures, regulations, alternative building technologies, and look at the costing models and so on. And that was then, the tender was awarded to PPT and the Special Needs Housing Project Steering Committee, basically comprised of the department, representatives from the Department of Social Development and Human Settlements. The Department of Health did not participate at this stage. I think it was quite close to the Isidimeni catastrophe, and civil society was also not part at this point. So the implementation guidelines were compiled, and the joint policy task team meeting was organized, and was with various role players, as you can see, and it was attended by about 90 plus representatives, and everybody was also afforded time to get their comments in by the end of September. And follow-up meetings were held with the national department, by the national department, with the provinces on the implementation guidelines. And I think at that stage, it was COVID time, and we just realized, that government would have also been in a better position to respond to the catastrophe of Isidimeni, or wouldn't have been in that situation if people have followed this, the policy and the implementation guidelines were there at the time. Also the COVID pandemic, which highlighted the whole issue of homelessness and the problem of gender-based violence that escalated. So at the end of December 2019, then the Commission of Gender Equality subpoenaed both the Department of Social Development and Human Settlement to appear before the Commission and account on the state of shelters in South Africa. That was in December, yeah. And they were required to submit their responses. The Department of Human Settlements then hosted a workshop on special needs housing and the gender-based violence issues, and they have undertaken to get the policy implemented by June 2020. The Commission for Gender Equality presented, however, to the Portfolio Committee on Human Settlements in July to complain that this has not been done, and the department agreed to finalize everything then by September, which obviously did not materialize. So many more interdepartment meetings took place, also between the DDG. And so I'm really happy to hear also from Mr. Nkogla that now there are some definite decisions and resolutions taken that will take this matter forward. And so some of the issues, I just thought I'll just raise a few, or just note a few issues that were raised in the past. Was the issue of the responsibility for special needs, where does it lie? And a part of during the formulation of the policy, a legal opinion was obtained from Werkman's attorneys, but also later, as I've mentioned before, from the state law advisors in 2017, I think. And then the other problem or the issue was that it's an interdepartmental program. There were perceived complications, which was not really experienced in current provincial programs over the past 22 years. So we're happy to hear also that those issues are now resolved and will be resolved in terms of the MOA. Capital funding, that whole issue of the capital funding, I'm so glad to see, Mr. Nkogla, that is now also resolved, that the department will be responsible for the capital funding and the departments for the operational funding. There were also concerns about the sustainability of NPOs and service delivery. And this is something that is important. It's an important issue to note. NPOs or NGOs are the ones who are providing the service, and they are the ones who have to determine if they can afford a program like this. And so many of them will not get themselves, well, most of them won't get themselves in a situation where they are sitting with people that they can't feed, that they can't care for, and that they can't look after sustainably. But anyway, within the implementation guidelines, provision was made for thorough institutional assessment, feasibility studies, checking on finances, all of those things. Then also, then also the statutory oversight by both the departments because the operations of these facilities are typically governed by legislation. And also, they have to meet certain criteria in order to be funded. And so there's ample oversight. And then the issue of emerging NPOs were also raised at some stage, and specific process was developed to be followed, such as a written commitment from the Oversight Department for financial support, or operational plan that included cash flow and capacity building plan and the M&E plan. And so all of these issues were addressed as things developed. Then other issues were raised that some of the provinces may have capacity problems to manage the program. Yes, housing is a very complex program, but the department has been doing this for many, many years. They are well equipped and they have a footprint everywhere. And so as far as possible, the normal application assessment procedures were kept, except for the input by the oversight departments. And then specific provision was made to streamline the processes for the oversight departments within the implementation guidelines. And similar, it's very similar in any way to the processes that they have to follow when the NPO wants to register such a facility. So some provinces recognize the need and they have assisted over the years. So in conclusion, the civil society have been really cooperating in good faith with government for 2 decades, really, to try and get that policy developed. For 7 years now, both the departments and the NPOs are waiting the approval of the policy. And as Mr. Ngos mentioned, this is also pushed for by the Chapter 9 institutions on national and political level. And yeah, so I think all the issues have now been addressed, and either in discussions on all levels or in the implementation guidelines. Then the legal mandate is there. The minister is empowered to institute national housing programs to satisfy the constitutional and legislative obligations. And that's also been confirmed with the 2 legal opinions. And so for now, at this time, the real issue are that all the rights listed in that constitution are currently not afforded poor and vulnerable people with special needs, housing needs, earning under 7,500 rand per month. And yeah, I'm really yeah, and the housing up to now has really been left to NPOs to sort out. And so we are thankful to hear in Mr. Ngos' presentation that this issue will now be fast-tracked and that the policy will soon be approved. So thank you.
Thank you, Lizelle. I now want to call upon Margaret to give a perspective from as a stakeholder in one of the implementing agencies. Margaret, over to you.
Thank you, Gladys. Oh dear, I'm just going to show myself briefly. I do not have a presentation. I'm going to talk to the issue. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Dalla Oma Institute for inviting us to this webinar to speak on behalf of NGOs regarding the special needs housing policy. Perhaps I should first state that I'm a social worker who has worked at both the National Department of Social Development and the Gauteng Provincial Department of Social Development for many years. I also served on the distributing agency for the charities sector of the National Lottery from 2001 to 2012. And I am the coordinator for the National Coalition for Social Services and am here in this capacity today. Ngos is a voluntary coalition of NGOs providing a wide range of developmental social services. Our members include both national and provincial NGOs that have affiliates or branches at grassroots, providing services to the vulnerable in all communities throughout South Africa. Our members include, for example, Child Welfare South Africa, South African Federation for Mental Health. I see Bharti Patel is here today. South African National Council for Alcohol and Drug Dependence, Epilepsy South Africa, South African Women's Federation, the RCFF, Rata Social Services, the Salvation Army, Council for Church Social Services, the National Adoption Coalition of South Africa, and Kulisa Solutions, and more. Clearly, our members serve a wide range of people in a wide variety of situations that require care, protection, and treatment. Community-based interventions as well as residential care facilities are required. Ngos's main aims are to empower our members by sharing information and best practice between ourselves, to influence policy and legislation in the interests of the communities we serve, and to lobby and negotiate with government on issues that affect people, communities, and the delivery of social services. Our first contact with the concept of a special needs housing policy occurred at a scheduled meeting on 14 June 2014 at National DSD, where Ngos, as an overarching network organization, was meeting with DSD to share information. At that meeting was in attendance the Department of Human Settlements, the DG Murray Trust were also present, and Ngos was informed about this project to develop this special needs housing policy, and we were asked to collaborate in its development. This gave us much hope, as we had been lobbying for capital funding being made available to NGOs for the provision of housing for no or low-income people with special care needs. This included, and Lisa has given you some idea of this, but various submissions were made in 2005, 2008, and 2013 to the National Departments of Human Settlements, Social Development, and Health. After this first meeting, Ngos members met regularly with the group working on the policy and provided inputs on the specifications for certain types of group housing, such as treatment centers for substance abusers, group housing for people with mental disabilities, homes for older persons, and children's homes in particular. As we worked, our hope grew that there would indeed be the opportunity to access capital funding for much needed facilities that would enable us to improve and increase service delivery to the poor and needy. The policy was presented, and Ngos attended the national workshop in early 2015, as Liesel has already said, and we heard in April 2015 that the policy had indeed been finalized to be presented to the ministers. Over the past more than 7 years, we have waited and wondered. We have made inquiries only to be told that the policy is not approved yet. At one stage some years ago, as Ngos, we wrote to the Minister of Human Settlements and to the Minister of Social Development, urging that there be action in terms of approving the policy. We followed this up with letters to the Portfolio Committee for Social Development and the Portfolio Committee for Human Settlements. We received no responses. Later on, the Human Rights Commission undertook an investigation into the policy, and Ngos attended a presentation and discussion that they had organized. Again, hope flickered as the Human Rights Commission said they would pursue this matter further. But we heard nothing further, and it seemed to us that there was generally little will to ensure that this policy is implemented. This is extremely worrying for NGOs providing social services. We are expected to serve the social welfare needs of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. To do so, we frequently need infrastructure to do this and to accommodate children, women, older persons, people with disabilities, the homeless, substance abusers, to name a few. The Department of Social Development subsidises some of the NGO's programs and services, but it needs to be pointed out that the subsidy is not calculated on the basis of actual costs, and it often is only between 25 and 65% of the actual cost of services to NGOs. In addition, there is no subsidy or grant that is paid for capital cost of buildings, their maintenance and repairs. Nevertheless, to provide these services and to be registered to do so, organisation services must meet the norms and standards for the particular type of service, health and safety standards, as well as local government's requirements. The lack of any funding for maintenance and repairs of buildings is a huge gap, as often buildings in which our services are operating are old and require substantial and frequent maintenance or repairs. Organisations use any reserves they have, approach donors, undertake fundraising, or go into partnerships with other organisations in order to ensure that they have the necessary infrastructure that meets the requirements. It is widely recognised that the social services run by NGOs are underfunded by government. Although NGOs seek financial support from businesses, trusts, donors, and the public, the extent of the support has been steadily waning, particularly in the past few years, given the economic climate in South Africa and now further abroad. Faith-based organisations, for example, find that their congregations simply cannot support them to the extent that they did formerly. In addition, the National Lottery initially provided much support to organisations, not only for operational costs, but also buildings and equipment, but this too has waned and has unfortunately not always been used correctly to run viable projects by competent NGOs. This has been exposed by investigative journalists, and there was again a report from Ground Up this morning. Corporates are also struggling financially, and they are contributing less to organisations for all types of services. Many homes for older persons I know of have closed or now only admit people who can pay for care or whose families can pay for care due to the inadequate funding provided by DSD for older persons who receive but a social grant. However, many organisations do manage financially if there is a mix of people who can pay and people who cannot to the same extent. Nevertheless, the availability of care for poor older persons is becoming more scarce. The past few years, and Liesl also mentioned this, and the pandemic have highlighted some specific gaps in services that are available for certain target groups. Two of these are shelters for women who have suffered domestic violence and their children, and the other is shelters for the homeless. These came to the fore particularly in the early days of the pandemic. I was recently assisting a PhD student with her research into a support program for the parents of adolescent substance abusers. She interviewed the parents and their stories of what they have been or are going through with their adolescents who are using neopi, crystal meths, and cocaine are heartbreaking. Many of these parents complained about how hard it is to get assistance in the form of treatment in a centre for their children because of the long waiting lists. In addition, the centres are far away from where they live and not easily accessible. We know youth unemployment and substance abuse are very prevalent in all our communities, and treatment centres and programs are much needed. This policy could make a difference in this respect. It is very difficult, basically impossible in fact, to state what is needed in terms of special needs housing to meet the needs in our communities. There aren't adequate or reliable databases, and we have little information on what is available versus what is needed. I would urge the Department of Social Development to undertake community profiling in all provinces, districts, and regions. The officials need to use the available population statistics of the number of people, their ages, level of disability, income, etc. in the districts and determine what services are available. Then they need to decide on targets for the various types of services that the department and NGOs will work towards to achieve. This would then form a rational and accountable basis for measuring the availability of services, determining priorities for expansion or new facilities, and the granting of funding. We are fully aware that buildings cannot be erected to accommodate and/or care for the poor and vulnerable without a guarantee that the Department of Social Welfare will fund the organisation for the service to be rendered. This is fundamental, and provision needs to be made for this in DSD's budget. I would suggest that once the policy has been approved, that each province should identify 1 or 2 special needs group housing projects in partnership with NGOs in the province and implement the policy. This will enable the 2 departments and the NGOs to iron out any difficulties in the process for future implementation. The special needs housing policy provides the means, if implemented, to enable us to meet our constitutional mandate to provide care and protection to the poor and vulnerable. We urgently need approval and action. I had made a brief mention of the fact that many facilities are providing services based in old buildings or ones that need urgent and fairly expensive repairs. It would be most helpful if this policy could eventually implement the financing of this aspect, as there is no assistance for NGOs from government in this respect. That is just a thought. And another thought to share and emphasize is that it is an undisputed fact that it is far more cost-effective to empower NGOs to provide much needed services, as this costs the taxpayer a fraction of what services run by government do. Thank you to the Institute again for this opportunity to give some insight into NGOs' experience with the need for this policy to be approved and implemented. I trust that this webinar will be an impetus to achieve this end in the interests of the people we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank all the 3 panelists, Mr. Nkola, Lizelle, and Margaret. Thank you so much for giving insights from your perspective, from Department of Human Settlement, from a civil society perspective, from a stakeholder perspective. We really appreciate. I must apologize, our 4th speaker is not available, so we'll now head to the question and answer session. And I want to go through the chat box. There are a few questions for the panel. So I'll read 3 questions and then I'll let the panel decide among themselves what who will respond. This is from Batish Patel. Why are persons with invisible disability excluded from the special needs housing policy proposed? And I think this is also related from Shani Gaffen. Does the policy also cover persons with psychosocial disabilities or persons with mental illness who need assistance, who need assisted care to live in the community? So I think that's one question. Question 2, Department of Human Settlement as well as Department of Social Development would fund shelters from institutional housing subsidy. What happens in the provinces? So one person indicated that Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal were doing this. but the policy is not implemented, it's implemented differently in those two provinces. So I think the question is, how do we align that? The third question, to what extent does the housing policy make provision for independent living for persons with disabilities? I leave that to the panel to respond.
Can I just say my understanding of the policy, and Liesel can maybe confirm this, it talks about people with disabilities. So we must look at the definition of disability. I mentioned specifically that, for example, mental health assisted in when we were talking about the policy and the specifications for accommodation for people with mental illness and mental disabilities. My understanding is it's open for all types of disability. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Liesl, would you like to respond?
Yes, I just want to highlight here within the an extract from the policy that it does make provision for intellectual or psychosocial disabilities. And it makes provision for independent living for people with physical disabilities. I just want to see here. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, and you will find that here, oh, let me just take this away. Okay, so for people with disabilities, we have group housing schemes, complexes for persons with disabilities, independent living units in secured areas, assisted living, and frail care. So it is for both types of disabilities. So those are the types of facilities that can be funded.
Perhaps to add on to that, Liesl, there's a question on some Zubeda Dango seeking clarity on how shelters for domestic violence are included, and I see it's here on your presentation.
Yes, so they with the victims of domestic and gender-based violence, there could be overnight or short-term stay shelters and second stage housing facilities. Somebody also asked a question about the policy in the programs in KZN and national. The province has made use of a mechanism that they call the institutional housing system, and it's a variant of that they've been using to assist where there's a need. And this is not a national policy, and ever since the national policy was finalized, this is also becoming more difficult to implement or to apply for this type of funding, even in a place like KZN, where they are still assisting, but everybody is waiting now for the
Liesl, we lost you there. I think we lost Liesl there. If I may go through one or two questions, there is a question of what are the proposed rental structures considering the very limited social grant provision?
May I attempt to respond to that? I think if I may start with the other question from Vanessa on regards to whether the policy will be taken through the parliamentary process and the implications of this policy on the Housing Act. the policy is not going to go beyond a stage of cabinet approval if it goes through that route. Because the Housing Act itself empowers the Minister of Human Settlements to determine not only policy, to determine also programs which are, when they've been approved, are included in the National Housing Code. The Institutional Housing Subsidy Program, for instance, that has been referred to here, is part of the National Housing Code. Yes, in some provinces, there's been a noticeable tendency to consider the institutional housing subsidy as non-existent, whereas it is part of the National Housing Code. It has not been amended, nor has it been repealed. So that process is going on in this current financial year. For instance, one of our intentions, as I indicated on the slide with regard to policy priorities, is the development of all kinds of policy instruments, small-scale rental, rent to buy, and so on. We are seized with those policies, developing of those policies in this current financial year. When we published the increase in the National Housing Subsidy, there was a notice as well in the Government Gazette that we also placed with regards to income bands for social housing. That was done purposely so that persons or individuals who are receiving pension are not excluded from being able to qualify for access to those housing opportunities. That we published that in the Government Gazette on income bands at the beginning of this year in preparation for the current financial year, because we've provided for increases in all the subsidy amounts that are applicable to the programs in the National Housing Code. I hope that will assist. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nkola. I have two follow-up questions on that while we wait for Lizelle to join us. About transitional housing for women who exit shelters. Is this provided in the special needs policy, proposed policy? And this is from Joy Langa. In essence, she's saying not second stage housing, but rather long-term rental units for women exiting shelters. That's one question. And the next question is on, perhaps you could elaborate, you could give a time frame in terms of what is the planning from the Department of Human Settlement in approving the policy, or what are the next steps in approving the policy from a departmental perspective? Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Nkola.
Thank you so much. Well, the last one, there's an undertaking we've made to the minister that will try and conclude this process within the next month, precisely because we also have to provide a feedback to her and to the National Council of Provinces on the finalization of and implementation of this policy. So the time frame is that we will meet as officials, ensure that we coordinate a meeting between the two ministers and have the policy also concurred to by the Minister of Social Development. That is the process that we're leading towards. And if we can be able to achieve this before the end of August, that will be one of the greatest achievements that we're aiming to do because of the history of the policy itself. We refer to second stage housing as it was referred to by the minister. There's been a lot of discussion around the provision and creating of a program that will enable this sort of arrangement. But I'm sure you'll understand that the way our subsidy currently is functioning, our subsidy, that what we subsidize, a portion of which goes to, in terms of, in the form of a CCG, goes to the SHRA for social housing. We have to provide a mechanism that will be accommodative of what we seek to do in terms of long-term, whether it's long-term rental option or it is a form of a housing opportunity that will be provided. We are still considering and applying our minds on what nature it should take, precisely because I'm sure you understand the complexity of our subsidy system that you would, as it stands now in the National Housing Code, you need to qualify. We've got a series of qualification requirements that we need to do. And if you're coming with the policy as you're presenting now, that we're hoping that it will be approved and be implemented, you don't want to draw in the qualification requirements of outlined in this policy through to the existing national housing programs. That would not work properly. It would end up excluding quite a number of people. So it has to have its own qualification, the criteria and form of subsidy that is to be provided, whether it is going to be provided to social housing institutions or to institutions that are purposely designed for this purpose. I hope that assists. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you. I have about 3 more questions for the panel. This is, does the policy, the proposed special needs policy, and this is from Arwa, include changing building codes and regulations to ensure adequate housing for persons with disability, guarantee accessing public buildings and spaces? That's one question. The other question from Shani is, internally from the Department of Human Settlement, the question is, how is accountability being ensured across this whole process? I think I understand that question like that. Additionally, who from government is being held accountable to drive the process and keep the public, the civil society informed? That's the second question. And there's also a request that we share the draft policy and guidelines with the participants of the webinar. I stand to be guided on that by Lizelle and Mr. Apologies. And then from Bati Patel, there is a proposal that the Department of Health, who has developed guidelines under review for residential and daycare facilities for persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, could perhaps be involved in this discussion. I leave that to the panel. I'm trying to see if Lizelle is back. I think this is
back.
Okay. So this is between Lizelle and Mr. Nkola.
So maybe in terms of the policy and the implementation guidelines, I wasn't aware that DSD would also now be able to apply or initiate a project. So some of those things that have been decided now between the 2 departments now somehow need to find their way into the implementation, well, both into the policy and into the implementation guidelines. So I suppose there will be minor tweaks to be made in this regard. And so I cannot talk on behalf of the Department of Human Settlements. It's their documents. And so I assume once it's approved that it will in any way be made publicly available as they are doing with all the other housing programs that they are running in terms of their housing, in terms of the housing code. So that, but Mr. Nkogla can maybe give a little bit more feedback on that. As for the Department of Health, Louis, we had this the privilege of getting Louis. What's Louis' name now? Anyway, we went to see the Department of National of Health, and we presented everything to them, and we asked them to assist with the implementation guidelines. And at that stage, they did not see their way open. We have consulted all the documentation that we could get from the Western Cape Department of Health. As far as possible, we've integrated that into the implementation guidelines. I think, since the oversight departments, which is the Department of Social Development, as well as the Department of Health, will be involved step by step, they will ensure that the plans and the proposals and the feasibility studies and all of those things will take into account all the regulations and the guidelines of the various departments, because those are still applicable. It's not something that, this program is not something that is replacing what is there with the oversight departments. So, but thank you, Barty, for that. As for the civil society to be informed, we've tried in the past to circulate emails to about 130 civil society organizations. We've basically stopped doing that because we didn't really know what to say as the policy wasn't approved and there wasn't really any progress to report. But I'm sure that is something that will, once approved, that will be something that will be in the papers. It will be good news for everybody to share, and also through the organizations, representative organizations such as Ngos. What was the other question?
I think you covered
Okay.
about 2 to 3 questions. You covered it.
Can I just respond on the
Yes, please.
to building regulations and people with physical disabilities?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
We just want to emphasize that we have to comply with building regulations, particularly SANS 10400. It is also incorporated within the norms and standards that are in the National Housing Code. We have to comply that, and perhaps when people will be able to get to read the implementation guidelines, they are specifically provided that there must be compliance with SANS 10400 XA. With respect as well to building plans, site plan, and so on. So there are technical requirements that that must be provided. And just to as well note that the Department of Health belatedly approached our department after both documents were finalized, but it's a process maybe that will be taken forward at another stage. But just to notify colleagues in the platform that they did approach afterwards. Now the question perhaps that I would like to, if before we close, Chair, for all our, I don't know, Lizelle, if that will be possible. The issue, when I indicated there were 2 issues that are critical. One of them is with regards to accountability of NGOs. Lizelle, when you're presenting, you did mention of the context and the anciency with regards to the funding of these centers, particularly in the light of what has happened at the CTMA. Perhaps, I don't know, it will be good to hear from civil society with regards to the process of how, when this policy is operationalized, how is civil society going to ensure accountability of the people who are applying for the for funding and also to run the centers that are provided for in the policy. I think that will be something perhaps not now or in future that you could perhaps write to the minister and indicate that this is how you think that accountability will be ensured. I know that in the implementation guidelines we've provided for, but for our interest is the question of accountability because of the context in which we operate in. That remains a big concern to us. That will be all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll now give the panelists, we're almost at the end of the meeting. I want to give the panelists about 2 minutes to say something and before we close. Let's start with Margaret, a 2-minute message to the participants.
Yes, thank you. I think that this has been very helpful. And the most encouraging thing is to hear from Mr. Nkola that we are going to see this process hopefully concluded in a short while, shall I say. He talks about the end of August. I would just urge the departments to not only look at departmental projects, but to look in the NGO sector. We have much experience. We are on the ground. We know what the needs are. We really need this to be assisted in the regard of capital funding. And I would look first at what the NPOs need. Please do it in collaboration with us, and please communicate as far as possible to us as to what is happening. I think communication is one of the most important, fundamental components of any partnership. Like a marriage, if you don't have communication, there is no marriage. I'm asking that please communicate with us and keep us informed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. Over to you, Lizelle, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm really very excited to hear from Mr. Nkola that they want to fast track the approval of the policy and the implementation guidelines. Yeah, obviously, I think that I have to agree with Margaret on the whole issue of communication, and also to remember that this is first and foremost been fought. This whole road that we've been coming along for the past almost 3 years. It's 30 years. To assist NPOs in the first place, and to have a mechanism so that they don't have to compete with the department. I understand why that may be required, that DSD is also initiated, and DOH, but that there should be some balance, as Margaret has also said, that the NPOs should be the main focus. And I can assure the departments that in my little bit of work with the NGOs, it is a very nice experience, and we very, very seldom have the type of problems that you experience with the normal human settlements programs. And I want to also put Mr. Nkola at ease. Once you get this thing going, there will be teething problems, and that's normal, but it's nothing that his department won't be able to resolve. They are used to very much more complex programs than these ones that's usually fairly small in comparison with the mega projects that they are running. So yeah, we're looking forward, Mr. Nkola, this announcement that this policy is eventually approved.
Thank you, Lizelle. And now I go to Mr. Nkora to conclude. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and to fellow panelist members. We appreciate, again, the opportunity for us to be able to explain on what we are doing. You'll remember, Chair, that we came, I think it was 2019,